Hello. I've just been watching Grumpy Andrew's Horror House. It's a YouTube channel that is, what's the word I'm looking for? Dedicated to horror movies. I reckon he's probably the best horror reviewer, enthusiast online. And for that reason, I decided to just do some really sort of amateurish and very quick-paced and consecutive reviews of films that I've watched recently, which kind of fall into that category. He is a consummate professional. He uses all stills and clips from the films, and he does a very thorough analysis, and I'm going to do the exact opposite because I've got the attention span of a gnat. Most people do watch these types of movies, sorry, not films and movies actually. So let's start with Pulse. This is a film that probably a lot of horror fans have watched or heard people talk about, and it's a very clever film that was partially crafted by Wes Craven. Basically, the dead are able to infect the world of the online habituals and kill them, and it's very clever. And this is where someone like Grumpy Andrew would go into an amazing amount of detail. I'll probably spend about 30 minutes analysing each aspect of it. I'm not. That's if you want the master's degree, equivalency of it in terms of comprehension. I comprehend it, I just can't be asked boring people to death with this sheer amount of detail. Most horror films are a pile of shit, let's get it straight. There is no horror, they're just horrific. They're just terribly made, and people who are actually turned on by the thought of other human beings being murdered are psychopaths, and they definitely need to be put down. You're sick in the head, and even the fictional equivalent of murder is absolutely disgusting. So I hate horror movies, but that is a very clever horror movie. Very clever. True horror movie to me is something that creeps into you, creeps upon you. Its atmosphere, and it's a threat rather than an actual set of circumstances in any way. That's just reality, regardless of other people consider it to be negative or evil. On one level, everything is evil, but there you go. If you don't know what I mean by that, have a think about it. So that's Pulse, and I definitely recommend that. This is for people with very short attention spans like myself. The next film, and I've seen it before, but I didn't watch it all the way through in the past, is Leatherface, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. Now here's another one that Grumpy Andrew will have done a very thorough review of. I would recommend going on to his channel. But the thing is, if you find this video, then my assessment of it is it's quite a well-made film for what it is, which is basically a very poor third film in the trilogy. It's nowhere near as good as the second movie, which was released in '86, and it's nowhere near as good as the original, which was released in '74, which is still the best and creepiest film ever made. And it just pisses all over something like The Exorcist, which is just a joke of a movie, and is really just the equivalent of saying or equating puberty with evil, and that's just the sheer sickness of the church. Or not the church, because the church is just a building, but religion thinks that puberty for a woman is something disgusting and immoral, and therefore it's akin to demonic possession. And really, if you look at the two things, they virtually are saying they're the one and the same. So they can all fuck themselves because a girl turning into a woman is not evil in any way. And what the point I'm trying to make here is Leatherface, I don't know what it's saying there. Fucking hell. My god, and there's another thing that you won't find on professional YouTube channels. Someone losing the thread of what we're saying. I think there's actually a lot of charm to that, because it tells you that this is raw footage and it's not. And you'd rather have the Blair Witch Project than the fucking Shining, which is another pile of toss, racist movie, or spirits of Native Americans drive all, the pilgrim fucking ancestors to kill each other. It says, it's a pity that the Native Americans just couldn't kill the first fucking pilgrims, and they could have kept that fucking land for themselves because it was theirs to begin with, but never mind. But yeah, the third, and I was comparing the original and the best, and the only real Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and forget the remakes, just, oh my god, the remakes are horrific. It's not even that it's remade, it's just rehashed. When you make a remake, it is like basically when Mozart premiered Così fan tutte, and then 300 years later it's done exactly the same way, but just with people. You don't have the same people who did it at that time because they're dead. Do you know what I mean? That is a remake. That's a rehash. A rehash is just an absolutely disrespectful and disturbing, reconstitution of it, and it's just. But yeah, this third film is, well, it's not imaginative. Two people in a car get hunted down and end up in a forest with other people who are being hunted at the same time by just one family. It doesn't really add up when you think there's only 6 members of the family and only 3 of them are actually hunters. The other 3 are just basically, one's dead, one's an invalid, and one's permanently in her dollhouse bedroom. Doesn't make any sense. And you just think to yourself, a guy with an 80-pound chainsaw who weighs close to 20 stone could outpace a young woman who only weighs half of that, or even a third of that, if you take away the chainsaw. Mathematically impossible. Just look at the acceleration of cars, and like, you're in a car with a lot of horsepower, it's very heavy, it can't beat something as small as, say, an old Volkswagen Golf. Impossible. It's just absolutely impossible, and it's just laughable. But, if that's what makes them happy, and that's what often is the case with horror, it's more convenience than horror itself, then so be it. There are good bits in all crap movies. There are all crap bits in all good movies. Does that straddle the border of, pros and cons? Times it does. But on the whole, it is just a psychopath's wet dream, really. And it just makes me believe that there are a whole lot of psychopaths in the world, and some of them might not have the guts to murder people in that way, but if they can't murder people in that way, they've got to make films about other people murdering people in that way. Do you know what I mean? So you're still dealing with the Looney Tunes. But I'd give it about 5 out of 10. Unlike that Pulse, which I'd give a full 10 because it's just insanely well concocted and executed film. Next up, I'm actually trying to see, there's a pile of films over here, and this is the Chainsaw Massacre, the beginning, which I bought as part of like a free pack, along with the first so-called remake of the original, and that Leatherface one. This film is not too bad compared to the remake original. The remake original is just laughable. Really got more in common with like sort of soft porn movies, in my opinion. If a horror movie has got scantily clad women from the second one, and it's got 2 couples or 3 couples together, it's a soft porn movie and it's not a horror movie. And I don't give a shit whether they introduce Genghis Khan and every single murder that took place during his time. After that point, it is not a horror movie, it's a soft porn movie. Let's get it straight. The people that are making these films really are more interested in sex than anything else, but they've got this sort of like guilt for it, so then they have to kill the people who they're, getting you to lust over, and who they're quite obviously incredibly lustful about themselves, and that's the reason why they've got them cast in that film. And I hate fucking soft porn, so-called horror movies. They irritate the fuck out of me, and they make up about 65% of most horror movies. If they've got from the beginning scene, it is just a bunch of young adults all drinking, all half naked, or even 3/4 naked, whatever, and that vibe to it. It's not a horror movie, it's a soft porn movie. Forget about it. You want a proper film, it's Pulse. There's not one bit of nudity in it, and it is just about the atmosphere, the logistics of creeping you the fuck out, and it does it perfectly, as the films like Blair Witch Project. I'd like to think of another one, but I can't. Yeah. But this follow-up to it is good. The best thing about it is the false sheriff. And I think you might know who that person is. He's killed an actual sheriff. And now he's decided that he is the real deal. Because according to his very words, chicks love a man in uniform. Even though the only women in his life are his, supposed to be his mother, but she seems to be the same age as him. And any of the women that they torture and kill, obviously. I don't know how frequently they, bag them, so to speak. That's a hunter's term, but he's the only good thing about it. But even that, like, even a great performance, a great actor, on that tangent itself can only entertain you for so long, and it just becomes trite and prosaic very, very, very sort of like, not very quickly, because that would be saying within a few minutes, but even he can't save the film, and you'll be finding yourself skipping scenes. The only good thing about that film is him. Should have really been called the sheriff. Never mind, the false sheriff, rather. Never mind. Let's have a look. I was watching, I know this is not a horror film, but if you've ever heard of Kelly Brook, she was a very big, no pun intended in any way, I want to describe certain assets. But she was a sort of page 3 centerfold type book for film, basically for magazines. Like one time it was just for the Sun, the Star, all those tacky red tabs, whatever you want to call them. And you find her in Heat magazine, Nuts, and sometimes I think occasionally in things like GQ and Loaded and FHM. And she's on a desert island. She's been washed ashore, away from her boyfriend and other people that they were with, and she's with the sort of like the galley boy, whatever you want to call them. There's a Spaniard called Manuel. You can see the faulty tower, almost like, joke. stream coming just from that one, and it almost seems to have been inspired by that as well, because she's an English actress, but no mind. And then all of a sudden her husband gets washed onto the desert island along with him, and then the film Free is about Free. Now I could understand this being a soft porn movie because it's set on a beautiful desert island, and it should be a porn movie on that level. You know, she's a beautiful looking woman. She was about 23 or 24 when this was filmed, and she's with a man who's around about her age, maybe a bit younger, to begin with. And then Billy Zane, who is a fabulous actor, who was once in the film Dead Calm. It's possibly the best film that's ever been set at sea. And he played an incredibly convincing psychotic, and he doesn't play a psychotic in this. He just plays a very much balding 40-odd-year-old man who, you know, you'll find endlessly sort of uncomplex and unlike the man himself, and the acting ability of the man himself. And it's very watchable because it's such a beautiful film, because where it's filmed, and Kelly Brook being incredibly epigamic. And yes, I've not even used the word breasts yet, but yes, she does have perfect breasts. As well, pretty much, you know, a perfect physique for a woman, but even that can only kept me going until the hour mark, and then I turned it off. It's an 85-minute film, so I wasn't willing to suffer it for another 20 minutes, which just basically would have been a Lord of the Flies to the death, you know, each man and woman for himself sort of thing, but who knows. Anyway, one of my old favourite classics, I'm going to actually do a sort of semi-review of it now, which is Wrong Turn. Now, again, you watch a professional YouTuber and horror aficionado like Grumpy Andrew's Horror House. Totally recommend that you check him out if you're absolutely, you know, frenzied, rabid horror movie fan. Is possibly the only film that can sort of compete with Texas Chainsaw Massacre for like originality of, can you imagine if this happened to you in this back part of Alabama, Louisiana, Texas, you know. And the main principle of it is slightly different from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but it is 100% inspired by it. And this time though, it's just inbreds, which I think is actually more inspired by an episode of The X-Files and everything else, and it's sort of like hybridized elements of it, which are very clever. I don't think anyone really needs to tell you about the film Wrong Turn, unless you were only born about 10 years ago, in which case, you know, this couple have basically been, if you've seen police chases, they pop the tyres of the fleeing suspects at a certain point with stingers. They've been stingered, and then he comes around the corner and hits them, and he was trying to, like, what he assumed was a shortcut. But then again, it turns out to have been, you guessed it, the wrong turn. So, about this getting boring and long-winded, which is the worst thing in the world with reviews, they're all being hunted. So there's 3 couples, and they're being hunted, all of them. And about half of them get killed by the time you get to even halfway mark, and they end up in the house of these mutant inbreds, sort of, you know, an in-between, or even a full-on hybrid of both. And sorry, there's just a scene in Riddick here with some naked women. I'm not reviewing Riddick here, but the TV's over there. I'm glad I didn't have my camera pointing over that way, because even though that's a very beautiful sight and the naked female form is beautiful. You can't get away with showing stuff like that on YouTube channels unless it's an erotic channel. What I mean by that is that you actually have to tell people that it's erotic, like ASMR or whatever, but talking about wrong turn here. I'm talking about it anyway. Hate them when people go, oh yes, we are going on a journey together. No, you're just filming something and you're talking to a camera. If it's anything, really, it's you and your camera that are going on a journey together, mate. No one else. No, it's not we. There's only you and your fucking camera now. Shut up. Fucking trying to make out as though like the people who are actually going along with you, like Thelma and Louise or something, you know. No one went with Thelma and Louise, by the way. It's just a film crew. But yeah, this Wrong Turn is just a really, really suspenseful film. Like, can you imagine, like, you're in the middle of, like, and I hate that term, nowhere, because nowhere is nowhere. Everywhere is somewhere in the universe and on this planet, but, yeah. You're a place that you don't know well at all, and, you're pretty sure you're being hunted by crazy people. And, yeah, they're being picked off, and then they get to the house, and they find out that they're fucking crazies to a degree they never even comprehend. Well, can't comprehend until you're in the possession of facts, which you have to come across or experience in a certain way. And they hide underneath, actually trying to escape because they've come back in the truck, and basically they've got hold of one of their friends that they've killed, and I think another one of them were killed as well, but they get away just about, and then the guy holds up the door to ensure that they can't hear them going out because it's an incredibly noisy door. And then he is seen by one of the waking hybrid mutant types. And as you guessed, that's what they spend all day doing, chasing after people. Like, if they wouldn't have physiques like that, spend all day chasing people, they'd be extremely slim. They wouldn't have very, very muscular physiques. They just wouldn't. But then again, they're supposed to really be the straight lineage back to the Neanderthal. Neanderthals were much stronger than Homo sapiens, modern men, but never mind. And they catch up with them, and they kill so many more of them, and then there's just 3 of them left, and it's just the main guy who crashed into them at the beginning. There's 2 women, and there's another one of the women was killed. And anyway, they end up with this watchtower after being hunted by them. They eventually find them because they're trying to radio themselves out of there. They get burnt out of there. They have to escape into the trees. They get away from them somehow, and with their lives. And then they end up back in their place, and they end up killing them. That's the quick version of it. For people who've got a very short attention span like me. And that's all I can say. Like, 8 out of 10 film. The 2 out of 10 it loses. I tell you why. Because it's not a completely original idea, but it is executed very well. And it loses another point for being a little bit too OTT and sort of cartoony at times. But on the whole, I honestly believe that if you're in the same situation with inbreds, mutants like that, things will play out very similar. It's just, they just seem to know how they're there too easily. Only that could be from the convenience of a script that needed to be an exact length, and everything had to be within, the gauge of that for the audience at all times. But other than that, yeah, brilliant film. I recommend the 2 follow-ups, particularly the second one, where it's just a bunch of, prisoners who were crashed sort of the fugitive style, Dr. Kimball, into that woodland, and some very interesting stuff there, because they're obviously not going to be scared of people like that if you're in prison for murdering whatever. They're as crazy as they are, but they're just not as determined to hunt and spend all day just like cutting up bodies and whatever. That is not an interesting thing to do. That is not a fun thing to do. That's just something that just someone with no mind passes the time with, because there is no mind there. A proper mind cannot be satiated by anything so fucking vacuous and disgusting. But there you go. Anyhow, I'm just trying to look at other films that I've seen recently that sort of fit into that. I mean, I could do a review of Ghost World. It's a film that I've watched many times, and I was a huge fan of Thora Birch, and I do like Scarlett Johansson in that, and Steve Buscemi, obviously. If you haven't seen it, it is a cult classic. It's got the same sort of like feel, I would say, as a Beavis and Butthead episode to begin with, and then it's like the female Beavis and Butthead, and this is not a horror movie because it's called Ghost World. It's it's actually adapted from a graphic novel, whatever you want to call it. I don't mean graphic in the sense that there's lots of violence in it. You know what I mean? And they're graduating, and they don't think it's anything special, but now they're grown ups, they're 18, and they can go and get their own place together and get their own jobs and be proud of themselves as adults. And it just shows you how one of them doesn't really give a shit for that and still wants to sort of remain within the realm of cartoony sort of looseness of lifestyle and more like a child in a way. Yet being very emotionally mature. And then another one of them is more emotionally immature, and yet she fully wants what other people have, and she gets it working in a coffee shop and getting her own apartment with a nice pull-out, ironing board at the side of the kitchen and whatnot. And it just shows you how friendships break up through the demands of convention. It's demanded that you are a slave in one so-called job position or another. If you're working in a cinema like I think his character Thora Birch, or in some awful coffee shop, or show you a porn store at one point. But that's with her and Steve Buscemi. And then the Steve Buscemi character is really like a man who's never grown up, and he's just a chronic collector of things, and he like he says, it's to fill gaps and like vacuousness in his life, and he finds it unhealthy and unattractive and every bit as sort of like off-putting as his own situation in life, and she finds it terribly attractive for that reason. Like certain women find men who are very honest about how worthless they are, and they don't see it that way. They see it as like something very beautiful, and she sees him as beautiful, and she loves his taste in art deco in his apartment and so forth, and she sets him up with this woman even though she really wants to set herself up with him, and she just won't admit that she's very attracted to a man who's 45 because she's only 18 and 19. So fabulous film. Shows you how you think the strongest of friendships can last high school, but I had the same thing. It can just melt instantly afterwards. And how another type of friendship and relationship can just form between two seemingly disparate individuals. A 45-year-old record enthusiast, obsessive, and an 18-year-old, kooky sort of Beavis and Butthead-esque female who has got just like an acid wit one-liner for everything that she encounters, but ultimately she can't find fault in him. So she's tamed by him, but she doesn't end up with him at the end, and vice versa, and it's a very unrealistic ending because she wouldn't have had the money to go off on her own, but it's a typical, you know, thing that graphic novels and they like just end in it. It has to end. They don't have to account for anything beyond that. So don't ever try to make it accountable to anything that is realistic, because it's bullshit and it can't be the case. Anyhow, another film that possibly Grumpy Andrew might have reviewed in the past, or if he reviewed it, he'd review it in a very different way, in a far more, languorous way that's deliberately extended, and the use of words would obviously be far more imaginative and possibly provocative. But that's me. I like things being done quickly, and just for the sake of boring people to death. And then you can bore people even if you're talking about something for a very short amount of time. I'm more than aware of that. I can bore myself. Death Becomes Her. Now that's a film I was watching probably last week at some point. That is a horror movie. Now that's a great film. Goldie Hawn, Meryl Streep, Bruce Willis, again, sort of like Insidious threesome. He was originally with Goldie Hawn, then she gets locked up for going off a nut, then he ends up with Meryl Streep. She gets past a certain age, and then she believes that she's worthless to the showbiz that she was worshipped by the audience and the employers, and she's told about this elixir of youth, which is bestowed, and she's only yet to find out by Isabella Rossellini. So she is just about over 40 in that film, and she's absolutely stunning in that film. She looks better than she does in her 80s movies, and she was only in her 30s then. So some people do get better with age, get slimmer, they get more toned, and they just work on themselves more. She's never looked as good as she does in that film, and she's got about 70 now. But yeah, what really makes it a great film is the performances, the actors. The script is incredibly funny. Just some of the funniest one-liners, and black humour is always the best. Yes, we all love black comedians as well. But I didn't quite mean that, just that concerning death and the temporariness of human. But yeah, Bruce Willis has never been funnier than in that film, even though he was hilarious in Last Boy Scout, and the interaction between him and Goldie Hawn and Meryl Streep is just superb. And it's a film that kind of, it might seem as though it's a predictable outcome for all, but it isn't. It is actually quite an unusual film. It kind of doesn't take anyone's. It's not one for favoritism. I think it sympathizes with everything in the film to an equal extent, and then it kind of expends it just as much in that it's worthless. So, great film. That's definitely a 10 out of 10 film. It's a classic for horror film aficionados. And it's a proper horror film. It's not some fucking soft porn, masquerade, as most of them are. I'll just throw this one in because it could be seen as a horror film on one level because of the horror of the Vietnam War, but The Deer Hunter, with, of course, De Niro, Christopher Walken, I can't remember the name of the other guy, but George DeZunder was in it at one point. So they're all young in that film, they're only in their 30s. And just the best war movie. War movies, again, are like horror movies. They do aggrandize violence, they do aggrandize murder, they do aggrandize blood shedding and all these things. and that is a film that most definitely doesn't. It's absolutely sickened by war, by the madness of masculinity committed upon everything around it. And the acting is superb, and the first hour of it is contained within, I think, Pennsylvania. It shows them in the steelworks, it shows them drinking together, it shows them basically hunting together, and then it takes you to Vietnam, which is very clever. And then the final hour is a kind of resolution of both. And you'll love the way in which it all sort of comes together. It might not be I won't recommend it to people who are below a certain age, because it won't be for your attention span. You know, I've only really started appreciating it now. I'm in my 30s. If you're a teenager, you won't appreciate that film at all. You might like some of the scenes in it. The Russian roulette scene, and well, actually there were actually 3 Russian roulette scenes in that film, but never mind. The main hunting scene, some of the Vietnam actual combat scenes, but yeah, you've got to have patience for that film, but it's worth having patience for, because it excels in all areas. Didn't win 8 Oscars for nothing. And it'll piss over any fucking Titanic, which I think outdid that. No, it couldn't outdo it in terms of just brilliance of conception. So, Deer Hunter is definitely one of the films that lives up to it, unlike The Godfather, which I think is a totally overrated movie. There's a lot of Oscar-laden movies I think are totally, and the only reason why it's basically its promotion for itself, and vice versa, you know, and they were there promoting things. It's like it's sycophancy, you know, and a lot of sycophantic elements within the filmmaking world are the primary reason why these films end up with so many Oscars, and that's it. You know, just because it's palatable on one level does not mean that it's not making your stomach churn on another, so you know what I mean. And I'll knock this one out as well. This is a great film. Spanking the Monkey. Now, I know this is not part of the horror genre, but I'm going through films quite rapidly, consecutively here. Here's an absolutely great film. It's a cult film, just like Ghost World, with Thora Birch and Scarlett Johansson. This one stars a young, and I can't remember the guy's name. He was only about 21 in this film, and the one who plays his mum you may have actually seen, and she has a bit of a look of Linda Fiorentina, who was in The Last Seduction, and that was made only a year before this film, or actually might have been made the same year, which is ironic, because the weird thing is both those actresses are quite similar in age, and they've got quite similar voices, and I actually think, I might be wrong, but they might be sisters. Is Alberta Watson Linda Fiorentina's sister? It wouldn't surprise me. They're both tall women, and they both got the same voice, and they're both very attractive. They're separated by about 5 years in age, and that's it. But that makes sense. One's the older sister, and basically a young man is going back on a coach from Washington, and he had a job there, and he's also got like academic responsibilities there, and he's only coming back very briefly, and he's returning to Washington, and he finds out that his father's got to go on this very long itinerary of coast to coast sort of flights, because he's a salesman, and just at that moment his mother has ended up breaking a leg, so she needs to be helped out, and no one else can help her out. So he's got to put off his Washington plans whilst his mother's situation is in that critical stage, and he resents it, but he ends up just accepting it, and they end up in an incestuous relationship, because he's helping her in the shower and he puts this cream onto her leg, and then one night they get drunk and she ends up having, well, she does seduce him, and they end up having sex. And then by that point there's a weird thing, because his university have called him back in, and they've actually offered over the phone to his mum to give her a carer whilst he goes back up to Washington. And then at the same time, then she's called upon her husband's sister to come, which doesn't make any sense in the film. It's a bit of a weird, like, I think sometimes this sheer convenience of fiction can outdo itself, and it can contradict itself massively. So she wouldn't have called his sister in if the university had already offered to send a carer down for her. But what it really comes down to is she doesn't want him to go away to university. She wants him to look after her because she finds her son very attractive. And it is a film about incest on one level, and it's also a film about frustration. He's incredibly frustrated because he wants to get on with his life. He wants to go to Washington. He wants to make his own way in the world. And he's being stopped by not just his mum's broken leg and his mum's incestuous seduction, but also by his desire to be with another woman who's round about the same age as him, and he can't make it happen because his mother's incestuous possession of him, of his mind, is ruining any sort of conventional attempts for him to be with her. But he's not conventional in any way. He's actually very much like his mother. He's totally unconventional, but far more committed, like his father. So it ends with them him trying to hang himself, him trying to strangle her after her finding him. Like everything's led at that point. He's tried to kill himself, he tries to kill her, and it's over and done with that, and all the hate and frustration and everything. And then he just goes out with his false friends, jumps off a cliff, and then finds his way through this forest in primordial ooze. Like, almost makes you think of like a Bible, fable in a way. And then gets to the side of the road and gets away from there in a big rig. So, fabulous film. 10 out of 10. Spanking the Monkey. It's been on Channel 4 a lot, and it was in the past. Just a great movie. And seeing as I'm doing, I may as well review The Dream Team. If you've ever seen The Dream Team, that is basically a spoof take on One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Now it stars Christopher Lloyd, who was in the original film, and in this he is a delusional individual suffering from obsessive compulsive disorder who believes he is an actual doctor himself, in a way sort of like assuaging his guilt about the fact that he's in a place like that and he's not with what you eventually find out, he's got a wife and a daughter, which is unusual for someone like that. Men like that usually can't have partners at all, or children, but and then you've got Michael Keaton, who basically just plays his same role as he did in Beetlejuice, but just with no makeup on. Just the funny guy. He's absolutely hilarious in the film, and his character's name is obviously a pun on Catcher in the Rye, the main character in that, Caulfield. Then you've got Peter Boyle. If you've never heard of this guy, he was in Taxi Driver, the one who basically gives him the advice and he tells him like it's about the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Fabulous actor, incredibly funny in that. He's got persecution mania, so he literally believes that he's Christ. It's a hilarious film. It's a very touching film. They end up going into New York for a therapeutic ball game, and they end up getting separated from their main therapist, doctor, and they end up accidentally witnessing a murder that is instigated by two police officers who are undercover, and they try and kill him, and blah de blah de blah. They all end up on the streets of New York doing their own thing separately, then they do their own thing together. At one point, underneath a cardboard box during like a downpour and in a army surplus store, and then they eventually find out the identity of the cops, and they find out where the doctor is, etc., etc., and then they get blamed for it, and then they get a reprieve because they eventually showed that they are totally innocent through just sheer, perseverance and things revealing themselves more than anything else, and anyone actually being convinced of them, like say in a court. And it's just a great film. It's very much like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, but it's just if you remember the bit with Jack Nicholson where he hijacks a bus and takes them on a fishing trip. Well, it's pretty much that, but they're in New York City itself, and they were on a bus to begin with, and then it ended up separate, and they come back together and again, and they're locked up together, and then eventually at the end the doctor's back with them, and they go to the ball game as normal people because he's released them because he believes that they're fully responsible for their actions and they've saved his life, and how could you keep people locked up after that? And it's beautiful. That sentiment is wonderful. That's another 10 out of 10 movie. Wall Street. Here's a film to review. That's a film you can really get your teeth into. It's one of the best films I've ever made, and on the actual subject itself of Wall Street, no other film has ever been made that's ever been that classy, clever, well cast. Charlie Sheen was Bud Fox, actually came up with the name Bud because they were going to call him Joe Fox. Let's not get into the boring fucking shit that people read about for hours on end about these films. That's just one thing. Gordon Gekko, Michael Douglas. You find it very hard to play that character, but he comes across as the most natural businessman ever. And then you got Martin Sheen, who played his father in that, and obviously Charlie Sheen's real father. Daryl Hannah was wonderful. It was more of a cameo by he played the Limey, and he was in Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. Terrence Stamp, that's it. You're just looking at like the creme de la creme of sort of like 80s like actors on that level. Charlie Sheen, a lot of people might not believe he's a great actor, but he is. His dad was a very good actor. Just go and have a look at Badlands with Sissy Spacek. Martin Sheen was fantastic. He was also a very handsome man as well. Bit of a titch, but very handsome. And Charlie Sheen is every bit as like charismatic, probably better looking than his dad as well, which is unbelievable. I think a man as good looking as that could actually have a son better looking than him, but there you go. And a better actor, and a fabulous movie. And Oliver Stone understood that world perfectly. His father worked in the stock exchange, so he had a lot of insight into it. And he almost sort of films it like it's a sort of guerrilla campaign. It's the the follow-up to Platoon in the way that he sort of films it all. And Gordon Gekko is one of the mad generals who believes all of these people who are getting killed for him, all these companies that are getting sort of sacrificed are his God-given right, his God-given sacrificial entities, and that he is this liberator of, as he says, companies, and he speaks the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and very few people can handle that. He's biblical beyond anything that anyone can actually comprehend or accept. Obviously, Bud gets into exactly the same things that he is getting away with, insider trading, and it's basically illegal, like, business practices. But he's so clever that he gets away with it for a long time. He even gets James Spader's character into it, although he's not happy with it at some point because the police are sniffing around him. But he really goes with the I was going to say pyromania then, but it's not pyromania, it's more like megalomania. But it could be said pyromania. I mean, they're setting fire to, people's lives in terms of just seeing businesses as expendable. It's like the way a pyromaniac would just set fire to something and just finish it off, So, and there's some very, very powerful scenes between Gordon and Bud, and towards the end there's a great scene between Bud and Daryl Hannah's character, and there are just so many great scenes in it. And I mean, you know Wall Street, but you don't necessarily know the psychology of the people who work there, and it really delves into psychology and the greed of it. And it is very much about the greed of the 80s on the financial level. And it may only have really been sort of embellished by other films such as American Psycho. But that was more to do with the sexual sort of like politics of gender, the gender war. Women being very liberated and having more opportunities than men in that area, and men not liking it. So Christian Bale being the golden gecko of his time, who just wanted to kill in order to win back the power that men previously had over women, but certainly don't have any more in terms of like job opportunities in the administrative sector. And although Wall Street is still run by money-hungry baboons, which are mainly men, so there you go. Wall Street again, absolutely fabulous movie, and out of all of them, really, I think I still believe it's Michael Douglas's film. Gordon Gekko is possibly the most truthful and most cartoony businessman portrayal ever. Bud Fox is possibly the most sympathetic and appealing, yet it's more in the realms of fantasy on one level. I'm trying to look at other films that I've watched recently. I haven't. 1408, yeah. Now there is another horror movie. 1408. Don't go into the room 1408 in the Dolphin Hotel. John Cusack doesn't believe it's murdered people that is actually haunted, and he finds out it is, and it's dealt with very well by the Swedish director, who only found out was Swedish in part of the making of, and it's very creepy, and you truly believe that he's going to get killed for real. But it's actually more to do with 1408 is more like the Room 101 in a way. That's what I think it's derived from George Orwell's fantastic book, 1984. But it's just the equivalent of that in a hotel, and that's what Stephen King's done there. That's very clever. He eventually gets out of the hotel room, but it's in his head. It's induced all of these things from his head. It's taken everything from his head, and basically it's like an acid trip. He's not moved anywhere, but everything inside of him has moved. Everything else around. But once he gets out of the 1408 in the film, at least, back to what seems like normality, it becomes more boring, or it becomes boring, period. And I just turned it off with I must admit, with about 25 minutes to go. I just couldn't watch any more of it. It was just dull. I know it was going to have like a conclusive, cathartic final half an hour, but I just couldn't be arsed with it. You watch a film like 1408 just for that, and they really should have just made it a 90-minute film where he was trapped in a room, and he could have played more of those aspects out in a longer, winded way. through the room itself, but never mind. Right, great film, but very cartooning. Bar the final half an hour, I'd give it 7.5. John Cusack, one of the few actors who could have really, and really can, make those type of roles. Thoroughly watchable. Guy just as watchable as what happens in the room itself, so won't totally ruin it for you. Now the film Stigmata with Patricia Arquette. I'm going through them here. These are a lot of films that I've seen recently. Great film. And again, I'll give it 7.5, like with 1408. Again, it's quite similar. Like, she is experiencing all of these things that are supposedly wrenched from, like, things that have happened to her through a religious sort of experience that she never would have cared for or believed in, like the John Cusack character. And then it just keeps coming towards her in the sort of like these hallucinations on the subway train and in the street, and eventually she is sort of like, crucified like Christ in every single sense, and the stigmata themselves are scars to show for it. And Gabriel Byrne's character in it is kind of almost the exact same character as Father, whatever his name was in The Exorcist, but far more interesting and better looking. Because he just looks like a really, really depressed middle-aged version of Rocky Balboa, but that's to say. There's even bits in that remind me of... Oh, it could have actually been the other way around, because that was made in 73, but never mind. Yeah, Patricia Arquette, as you know, is just a fabulous actress. And if you've ever seen one of her first films, which was Nightmare on Elm Street 3, she was just wonderful in that film. And I've got to say this, but she does have rather big boobs, and I don't care whether someone goes, oh, that's sexist. It's not sexist. Saying someone's got a large head, And she does have rather big boobies in that film, but, this film is all about, like, good and evil, but it's really more about, like, the ambiguity of those two things. Stigmata themselves just being, like, scars, which scars are not good or bad things. They're just things that are just, remnants, like residue of what you could potentially have one way or the other. But yeah, she just plays a very hedonistic character who is sort of punished for a loose lifestyle and then brought into accordance with what seems to be a more parochial and disciplined view of the world, like Gabriel Byrne's, but there you go. Could be just an excuse for a CGI fest, which I think it is. And then I also watched Monster with Charlize Theron and Christina Ricci. I actually did a review of this film on my old channel, and a young woman got very angry with me from Tennessee and said, it's just ridiculous what you've said, and then I actually got to apologize. I explained myself through a comment, and let's face it, Charlize Theron's character, Eileen Wuornos, was raped by her grandfather from a very young age, and what goes through the mind of a man who feels like he has to rape a child is pretty fucking crazy, in my opinion. I always used to think rapists were just people who were uncontrollably sexual, so they had to have sex or they felt like they were going to die. Now, if that was the case, and there was sort of like a voice in your head saying, fuck, you must fuck, you will die, you must fuck, you can understand that. That's almost like a demonic possession, but on a sexual level. But with that, basically, she had quite inbred, from the sounds of it, relatives. Real, just deep south types, and I mean, it is actually set in Tallahassee in Florida. But the thing is, I think she wasn't just raped by a grandfather. I'm sure I was told that she was raped by other male relatives, and they were all fucking disgusting perverts. So a woman who's raped repeatedly and just thrown away by her own relatives, does not feel any worth at all. So she hated men, and she felt as though all they were going to do is just abuse her and rape her and this and that and the other, and they did. And she wanted her revenge, so she would have sex for money, but then she started, one of them almost killed her, tied her up, and then she had to kill him, and she killed him, and she had every right to kill him. And then she's involved with this young woman played by Christina Ricci, although she doesn't think of herself as a lesbian or a dyke, as she says, and yet they're very much in a sexual and very unconventional love relationship. And by the end of it, she's caught out by what she considers to be one of her only male friends, and like she can't trust any males, but she didn't deserve to be gassed for it. And it's like saying it's alright to be raped and all these disgusting things, and you can't have any type of reprieve from that in your own world. So that's my final review, and Monster is an absolutely brilliant film, so go check it.